Hello, Michelle. Welcome to Awaken and Align.
Hi, Laura. I'm so happy to be here.
So I was just sharing with Michelle that I was sort of introduced to her in a very synchronistic way. I followed you on Instagram, Michelle, and I just loved what you were doing. And I didn't actually know that you were the person, the head witch behind Holisticism. And one of my girlfriends who I was hanging out with during the whole Asian Lives Matter movement that would just recently happened, which is still happening. But we were just talking about safe spaces as women of color, as Asian American women of color. And she mentioned that you have, well, she's a part of your circles, and she didn't want to go to that one circle that was, when the shootings in Atlanta happened. But she thought, I want community during this time. Like I need healing. So
Mhm.
she came, and for those of you who can't see Michelle, if you're listening on the podcast, she's a white woman, um, or identifies as white. And she said that the way that you held the space was something that she just had never experienced before from a white woman. And if it's okay for me to share, I would love to share the way in which you held the space, you and your coven. She said that you gave the space for women who identified as Asian to speak up and share their experience. And if anybody who presents themselves as white needed to share, then just know that they were taking that space of the Asian women of color. And the whole point of her sharing that with me was that she was a little shook that that was the experience that she received that evening, and she was not expecting that. And I think something so simple as giving these women that space had ripple effects, and clearly it had a ripple effect because you're here today. And I was just like, wow, what a beautiful human and what a beautiful company. So that's how I found her. That's how I found you.
Well, it makes me want to cry. So I'm trying not to cry, but that is, thank you for saying that. You never know. I think we're always trying our best, right? Like we're trying to do what's right. And it's really hard to know what's right all the time, especially as an outsider, or when you haven't directly experienced what other people are going through. And to hear that it not only resonated but felt like what someone needed is really cool. And I definitely can't take credit for holding space. It was a team effort. I have an amazing team of 4 people, 3 people, myself included, makes 4. And we had actually, this backstory behind that is we'd had an event scheduled. We do free events often for our community, and it just didn't feel right with everything that was going on to have business as usual. And I'm sure you can relate to this, Laura, but business and having a small business is a gift because you can be nimble, and choosing to have a business that is not just a business based on capitalism and acquiring more people and more money means that you also get to choose not to have business as usual. And that can also be really hard because it means that you need to constantly be relating to what's happening in the world around you and what could potentially be coming up for your community. And sometimes it means that you have to make sacrifices and you have to do things that are scary or jump because you know that that's what's right. And it's also sometimes really stressful because you have to act quickly. So my team really pulled it together the day before this event and said, I think we need to not have this event. I think we need to hold space instead for what's happening in the Asian American community. And we don't really know how to do that. And this is the best way we can think of doing that. We could probably do it better, but this is what we can do with the time that we have. And yeah, I'm just glad to hear that it resonated.
Yeah, I think listening to the backstory is going to make me cry, which as a double fire sign, I'm like, ah!
This is new. What's happening?
No, I really appreciate you. And I think because of hearing that story, everything that you write and all the IGTVs I've watched you now has more resonance for me. So thank you so much for being open to fucking it up and for just trying your best. Like you mentioned, like none of us know what we're really doing and if we're doing our best, but just having the willingness is everything.
Yeah, and it's like there's no one doing that. There's no blueprint, like that's the other thing when you're running a small business or a business that's divesting from capitalism and patriarchy and all the isms, right? There's no like blueprint. There's no one who's like actively really doing it at scale to like look to as a leader. And that's kind of cool because you get to forge your own path. And it's also horrifying because you're like, oh my God, what is their next step? Like, will someone just please tell me what the answer is? But that's like what we teach at Holisticism, it's intuitive business. So you have to go back to here and to yourself and like, what's coming through, what feels right in this moment, and do that. And also constantly be learning and fucking up and like increasing your own failure tolerance so that you can just show up and do better.
I love that. Before we get into that, can we start with your origin story? And I know, like, I don't want, we can sit here all day. I want to listen to your like biography and learn about how you became who you are because you're such a magical human. But like, where did you grow up? What did you study? What did you think you wanted to do?
Oh yeah, I've had a weird life. So maybe it will feel like grounding to other people. They'll be like, oh, I'm not as fucked up as that person. So cool. Yeah, I grew up in Southern California and I have a great family. I'm Italian. So like all of my cousins and aunts and uncles lived around us. And um, that's a big part of my origin and what I practice now. I practice Italian witchcraft.
Mhm.
So that was happening. My grandparents, didn't call it witchcraft, but they were always using sort of like things from the old country and how they cooked and how they showed up at home and how they cleaned and all the things, right? Like even growing a garden. So that's definitely informed my practice now, but I just wanted to be a dancer from ever since I was young. So I studied professional ballet, became a professional ballet dancer. And then when I turned 17, I started having seizures out of the blue and like huge grand mal seizures. And I went to a lot of doctors and no one could really tell me what was wrong with me. And I ended up sort of taking my path in a different direction, typically like with dancers. If you don't, especially ballet dancers, you don't like go to college, you go and you dance professionally because you have such a limited lifespan of your career. And I thought that's what I was going to do. And my life took a totally different turn. So I ended up going to school and studying dance at NYU. And meanwhile, just like trying to manage this epilepsy diagnosis, which is eventually what my doctors gave me as a diagnosis. It's often an umbrella diagnosis when people have undiagnosable seizure disorders, where it's sort of mysterious as to why they're having seizures and what their other symptoms are. But yeah, they put me on a really intense drug that made me really sick. And I lost my short-term memory, which was really hard as someone who like I was trying to be a dancer. So all you really are supposed to do is like memorize combinations and memorize choreography. And I was in this new place. I just moved to New York, which is like definitely my first love. It was the first place I ever felt at home. I never felt like I fit in California, although I love it here. And when I was, in my mid 20s, I ended up finding a holistic practitioner through a friend of a friend, one of my teachers. And they said, I think you should go see this person. They're a shaman. They work out of their house in Brooklyn. And I went and saw them and they did a ceremony on me. I thought I was there for like 20 minutes and I was there for like 4 hours. And after that session, I never had another seizure again. And I was able to go off my medication, and it was just like totally crazy because my doctors all told me that I'd always be on medication. There was nothing I could do, and that I'd probably die of a seizure in my sleep. And there was nothing I could do about it. It's just like, you just have to like manage it and be on drugs forever. So to be free of that was like incredible. And also I felt so guilty because 1 in 10 people have a seizure disorder. It's so common. And the only cure, quote unquote, is prescription drugs. And I had just gotten access to this person. I'm a white woman living in New York who went to an amazing school that connected me with these amazing people. I felt so privileged to find this individual who was a healer who didn't even have a website, that I just felt like this is so unfair that so many people aren't going to get access to the care that I got. And I just like lucked into it. And that was kind of my origin story for getting more into the wellness space. And I ended up going back to school and studying to become a nutritionist, and became a nutritionist, and then helped open a brick and mortar studio in Tribeca in New York, and then opened a brick and mortar in LA. And then woke up one morning after opening these fitness studios, wellness studios, and was like, I really don't want to do this. I'm not here to like help people get skinny. I'm here to like help people heal. And I don't know how to do that. And I want to help more people. Like, I know that I'm good at what I do when I connect with individuals, but I feel like I'm not making a big enough impact. And that was also part of my problem with dance. I felt like, especially modern dance, which is what I studied, and that when I did professionally after I graduated, there were so few people who understood it and who spoke that language, that I felt like I was talking to the same people over and over again. And I didn't think that that was the point for me. I wanted to help more people. I wanted to have range. And when I looked around at that point in my life, I felt like, well, who makes a big impact? It's like companies that have millions and billions of dollars. So I guess to have an impact, I have to have a company. And so I think I have to learn how to run a company. And I have a degree in dance. I'd like never opened an Excel spreadsheet before. And so I ended up joining a startup here in LA, and that got me into the world of tech. And I worked in tech for 6 or 7 years and learned a ton about starting companies and businesses, and learned that actually like you can be a total idiot and start a business. So like, why was I not doing it? Like, who cares? So that's when I started Holisticism, after all of these weird experiences, and sort of straddling the threshold of the ordinary world, the business world, the tech world, and then the mystical world, the special world, the world of witchcraft and magic and astrology and wellness and the unexplained, which like I was dancing in all the time, and walking between these two places. I wanted to bring them together so that they were less. I actually felt like the wellness world was super exclusive for lots of reasons, not just because it catered to rich, white, wealthy people, but also because the vocabulary and the language and the way people described mysticism and spirituality felt like, for my logical brain, it felt so, I don't know, difficult to hold on to. And I just wanted to make it easier for people to at least like dip their toe in the water to understand like how they could navigate that space themselves. So I feel like I just word spaghettied on you. What questions do you have for me?
Well, you word spaghetti perfectly. May I say that? I was like, keep going. I'm just gonna sit back and listen to this beautiful symphony. Well, first of all, yes. I think that, I feel very similar to your story, and you mentioned that as well, because in the moment you're doing your job, your 3D job, your regular job, and you're like, what is my life? Like, what does this mean? Why am I doing this? But then when you can connect the dots in hindsight, like that Steve Jobs quote where he says, you can only look back connecting the dots of your life. It's like, okay, everything that you did formed what you're doing today, and it all made sense because you needed to learn how to build a company in tech. And I believe your experience as in ballet helped you to tune into your body, and you got exposure to the wellness industry. So whoever's listening and you're like, what am I doing? There's a reason for it.
100%. And well, there's a reason for it if you decide. Like, because there's a lot that we don't want to like sort of open up the box of what happened to us in the past and pull out the gems from the shadow, right? The gold in the shadow, that we don't want to own the gold, but like there is gold there. I'm not saying to like bright side everything and toxic positivity, like your past experiences, but I think that often when we close a door on a past version of ourselves, we like really ignore the beautiful strength that we cultivated or the skills that we cultivated in that aspect of our lives. Like, I don't know if that relates to you and your experience in finance, where maybe you were like, I just don't want to deal with that part of me anymore. And you even like shut down a little bit to it. And then it's almost like, I don't know, like having a breakup with yourself, or after when you first break up with someone, you're like, fuck them. And you like never want to think about them again. And then as you go on later in life, you're like, actually, there were some good things that happened in that relationship. And I can give them that. And also own that, like, there were some shitty parts too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that I'm like, I learn that constantly of like the things that I reject of myself are sometimes the things that like I need to pull in order to move forward to like what I want.
Yes, I relate to that so much. And for some reason, that always happens to me during Mercury retrograde. I'm like, oh, yeah, that relationship was necessary for my growth. I don't know why it always takes that.
Yeah, it's probably because that's when they text you and you're like, right.
Yes. So, okay, now I understand why. I don't know why I can't pronounce it. Holisticism?
Holisticism. Yeah, you're just missing one. It's a made up word, so you don't need to feel bad about it. And holisticism, the word just like dropped into my brain when I was working at my tech job, where I like was more consistently having that existential like feeling of like, I'm wasting my life sitting at this beautiful desk with this amazing, kombucha on tap, like sitting on a mat. Like, this is such a great life, but like I'm wasting my life here, and that was coming up more and more often. And then this word holisticism dropped into my brain because I was trying to come up with a term to describe what I believed in. It's like, well, I believe in like holisticism. Like, I believe in a holistic life and like looking at all the parts, like not just religion, not just spirituality, not just nutrition, not just exercise, not just whatever, but like that everything, the political, the financial, like all of this impacts us, and we need to look at the whole thing in order to understand ourselves, but we don't. So that was the word that came in.
Yes. Well, I say this all the time that everything is spiritual. Your finances, politics, social justice, everything, because we're spiritual beings. And mundane is how we move through this world. And I don't know why you have to be spiritual separate from paying your taxes, or people can't talk about politics or race because you're a spiritual person. Like, that to me is just, again, crazy. But here in 2021, this is what you believe in, and I feel it in the energy of your company. How do you actually show up and embody that on a day-to-day basis when it is so polarized now?
Oh yeah, I mean, like, I think we have to sometimes be polarizing. Like, we have a lot of haters. I have a lot of haters. And well, I won't say that. That makes me sound like bigger than I am, but we get hate mail. I get hate mail at least once a week. I get people, yeah. But that's just part of being seen. Like, that's just part of being, like if you have an opinion, like, we should share our opinions. We also can change our minds. The company that I created 4 years ago is really different than how the company shows up now. In the last 4 years, we've divested from capitalism. We've moved all of our offerings onto a self-selecting sliding scale option, so we can have more inclusivity and range in terms of class when it comes to the offerings that we create. We've expanded our team. We've changed the way that we do our work and how we show up in our work. We've added things like, putting our pronouns into our email signature and making that be an important part of what we do and how we show up in space. And, we might change our mind on those things in the future, but that's where we're at right now. But I think if you're going to show up, like, you just have to be okay with some people not liking you.
Yeah.
And that's really hard because we're taught like I was taught, I'll speak from the I was taught that I should be likable, and that if I'm not likable, then that's something wrong with me, as opposed to, well, that's just someone else's projection on me of the stuff that perhaps they have not resolved in themselves.
So you believe that you have to be clear on your stance, where you feel about politics, about gender issues, about equality, do you feel as a leader it's your responsibility to be very clear in where you stand?
Good question. I think so. I think at least to be even clear in my lack of clarity, because we're constantly learning and evolving and new things are coming to light, right? And I think it's my responsibility as a leader to always be learning and doing research for myself and hearing new perspectives and sides. I believe in abolition. So that's there are a lot of people that don't believe in that, right? Like that's pretty polarizing. Even I'd say in the sort of like neoliberal world, where cancel culture is, a lot of people really think and believe that cancel culture is good and that it is necessary and it's accountability. And I would agree that accountability is really important, but I would argue that cancel culture is the opposite of abolition. It's just as carceral as sending people to prison. And we do need accountability, right? And we do need to we at the end of the day, like we need to act in love. And that's like the most radical thing that we can do. So I guess I think that as a leader, you can change your mind, but you also have to be active in in challenging your own beliefs and knowing, and in order to challenge your beliefs, you have to kind of claim what you believe. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And when you mean like abolitionist, what does that mean?
Like, I don't think that we should have prisons. I don't think that we should send people to jail. I don't think that we should literally cancel people's lives when they make mistakes. I think that if we live in a world where we say we believe in love, then we need to treat people with love, even when they have harmed us, because we want to work together in community to reform people and be part of their reform. And we want to believe and hold the vision for reconciliation, because ultimately that's what we want, right? We don't want to like end people's lives because they make a mistake. And that's the future that I'm holding a vision for.
Yeah. There's this tribe, there's probably many tribes, but there's one in particular in Namibia where each child gets their own song. And whenever the child like steps out of line or does something, the whole community comes together and sings the child their song to remind them of who they really are. And what you just said reminded me of like the prison system and how a little kid can fuck up when they're 10 years old based on the system that we live in, the fucked up system that we live in. And then you send the kid to jail, throw away the key, and what, he doesn't get another chance. Like, I just find that to be not an act of love, like you were saying. You're just like tantalizing my brain. I'm thinking about so many things at once.
Well, that's a beautiful story. Like, I know, you're like, oh my God, how much time do we have?
I'm like, now I have to look into this.
Yeah. And like, when people were saying defund the police, that really is abolition. It's taking money from putting people into prison, punishing them and ending their lives. Cancel culture, right? That's really cancel culture. Cancel culture is when you cancel someone's life. That's what the prison system is. And instead reinvesting into love, which is like education and community care and support and services. And like, that's the society I want to live in. That's a society I want to raise my kids in. God willing, I have them. So yeah. And I don't also like know what that necessarily looks like, because we don't live in a culture like that. And so it's like ripe for the making,
Yeah. So I'm so curious. You started this company, you said 4 years ago. And at what time in that evolution did you realize like this was the mission? Like, when did it become for profit and we're a wellness company to like, it's really what I'm hearing is social change.
That's interesting.
Radical change.
Yeah, I think it's always been about that. I started Holisticism as this like newsletter, a place for people where I could talk about these two sides of wellness And because I worked in tech, I kind of saw things through the lens of the tech world. And as I like grew the community, I was talking to wellness practitioners a lot. I was talking to a lot of people who are in wellness who wanted to connect with wellness practitioners. And the problem that I saw and that I experienced firsthand was there are so many incredible practitioners who just don't have access to the right community or people, and the people that are looking for them can't find them, or it's really hard to find them. And so many wellness practitioners also just don't know a lot about business, and even if they wanted to reach those people, they wouldn't know how to do that. And so I created a tech platform to help wellness practitioners get connected to their clients and basically run the back end of their business. And to me, I saw that as a pathway to healing more people, because I figured, well, if I can make it easier for healers to reach their clients, then they would get paid. And that means they wouldn't get burnt out, and they could reach more people, which is good for everyone, because we're not going to burn out our healers. And we're also all going to get access to whatever we really need. And that seemed really like impactful at that time in my life. I ended up raising money from VCs and giving it back, because I just didn't, at the end of that experience, it takes years to raise money. The end of that experience, what I wanted to build was so different than what these venture capitalists wanted to build. And I didn't want to be like, I didn't want to like be their pawn, I was like, I don't want to build that thing. That sucks. Like what you want to build sucks. And I want to help people. So here's your money back. And I guess I have to go figure out how to make this money myself. And that was really what kind of like catalyzed what we do now, which is we're a media company, and we create content and resources and education around intuitive business as well as around wellness. So people can kind of find their entry point into the well-being space. So I took that general idea of, if I can help more practitioners, more healers, more coaches, more leaders, more visionaries know how to take care of themselves, know how to run businesses that resource them so they don't get burnt out, and reach more people, then that's a win-win. And so that's what we do at Holisticism. We teach about intuitive business. And along the way, I was like, well, what don't I like about these VCs? I don't like that they're just extractive. I don't like that they're just viewing people as like dollars. I don't really like that it just like perpetuates the bad parts of capitalism, which really like are intertwined with marginalization and racism and sexism and cis-sexism. And how can I still support myself and my team and my community and my family and not contribute to that? And so that's what we're trying to build, because I think it's possible.
I am on board. I want to take a class. This is something that's been on my mind for so many years, is how can I unplug from all the isms in our society, capitalism, racism, all the isms, and really give back to the community while still being abundant and while still feeling like I'm doing something that's good for humanity. So without giving us the spoiler alert for those of us who want to take your course, what have you found are the keys? Is it possible to be profitable without capitalism?
Well, we have to acknowledge that we live within capitalism, and we haven't had the tower moment with capitalism yet. So we're not rebuilding capitalism yet, but we can actively divest from the aspects of capitalism that are the most problematic to us. So for us, that looks like, well, it looks at first how we run our business as individuals. So we have a team of 4, and making sure that we're not doing things like creating perfectionism or, paternalistic hierarchy inside of the company, that we're trying to keep it as flat as possible. And really taking the lens that I look through a lot is individual versus community. So when I am prioritizing the individual is when I'm often leaning into like typical systems of capitalism that also lead to systems of oppression. When I'm prioritizing the community, then I can potentially pull out the good aspects of capitalism that exist, which is ideally, like at its root, free market, free will, where people can choose what they want based on what works for them. And I can promote my community and pour back into my community. And I know that when I pour back into my community, they pour into people around them, and that uplifts everyone together. We also know that women in particular, when they do well, they're much more likely to invest in the people around them and in their communities than men are. So if I can get more money and more resource in the hands of more women, then that's probably a really good thing. And if I can keep the priority of community at the heart of everything that I do, and hopefully teach other people to do that as well, then all of a sudden the weight gets lifted off of our shoulders. Even like we were talking about difficult decisions in the beginning of this podcast, but when we have to make a determination as an individual, it feels very binary, like right or wrong, right? But when I bring to my community, here's the decision I'm grappling with. What do you want? What do you need? All of a sudden, instead of being like taking a paternalistic stance and saying, I know what you need, here's what you need, and like giving it to people, giving them the option opens up so much more spaciousness for me to, first off, not be wrong because I get to let them choose, and also actually deliver something that's useful to them. And I think that that's where capitalism can get really wonky, is when we're delivering things to people that they don't need, using things like scarcity mindset and like bad business tactics to tell them that they need this stuff in order to be good or acceptable by society. I don't know if that made sense. I just kept running on that thread. I hope that made, like, that came out.
It does, because it's so different from how I feel people operate on Instagram and how people operate with this. Like, if you don't take my 7-point class, you're going to be poor and you're not going to get any social media growth. And I'm like,
yeah. And the thing is, like, there's no one right answer. Like, we know that you've used the Akashic records. Like, when we open the records, we see all the potential outcomes, right? We see all the potential pathways, and like, they don't all suck. It's not like every other outcome other than the one that you want is the worst in the world. It's actually like, sometimes they're way cooler than the outcome that you thought that you wanted. So there's not one way to do anything. And that, I would argue, is some of the toxic sides of capitalism, which says that there's binary thinking, there's a wrong way and there's a right way. That's not true. We know the binary doesn't exist. Like, it's clear that the binary doesn't exist. So if we can move away from binary thinking, which is, again, individualist thinking, me versus them, and we can get more into communal thinking, I think that in general, that's going to help us. And that usually means that we learn in community, we learn from other people, and we also open up to potential different and new ways to trying things.
I think it's because you're Italian and I'm Korean, and we both come from collectivist cultures. Because I know Italian, so this is the similarities between Italians and Koreans. We're both peninsulas.
I'm okay. Yes, I'm living for this bullet point list. Yes, tell me more.
No, because I've actually researched this, because I was like, why are we so similar? We're both peninsulas. We both have 3 sides of water. We're both collectivist cultures that surround ourselves with an innate spirituality of the elements. And we are very, we consider our elders to be very important wisdom keepers. And because I have a lot of Italian friends, and you were mentioning that you have Italian ancestry, and I just learned that Italy was also colonized.
Yes, a lot.
Yeah. And so was Korea. So I feel like we have a mutual understanding of, like, we versus me. Like, let me take my community into consideration and stuff, not just about me. And in America, that's not how it works. It's like individualistic. It's like entrepreneurship, like getting after it. Let me do what's best for me. And that was very difficult growing up, because I was like, wait, but I have to ask my parents if it's okay.
That's so funny. Yeah. And I was like, wait, I have to ask my parents because I'm afraid to be bad. I'm afraid to be wrong.
So when you were talking about that, it just reminds me again, like that it's not that the way that we've been doing it is wrong. It's just that we've been so far in the individualistic side that we forgot about community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it isn't a priority in the United States. If we look at healthcare, if we look at childcare, there's a really great study that shows that across countries all over the world, where it gauges the happiness of individuals, of adults, based on whether they have children or not. And in countries that have healthcare and benefits for parents, the happiness is through the roof. Their happiness increases when they have children. In places like the United States, where the country doesn't support being a parent, doesn't support children in child rearing, happiness goes down. And it's because we just aren't set up to be in community here. And it impacts our well-being. Going back to what you said about how the political impacts our wellness, it's true. That's a perfect case in point, right? It literally impacts our happiness and our ability to feel held and to be well.
Yeah, but socialism, right? We won't go down that rabbit hole. But what you were saying requires a lot of self-awareness. Like even when you were talking about how you're a leader and how you're able to be humble and listen to different people's perspectives and people's needs in the community, like that takes a lot of humbleness and stepping back. But I feel again that for some reason the new age spiritual community and Instagram influencers, there's this like guru culture and this like cult following of these teachers where they're also human, like
Yeah,
also don't know shit. So
yeah.
um, how do you personally keep yourself in check? Like how do you not get down that rabbit hole?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think that, well, I would hope that I surround myself with people who are way smarter than me, and um, who would keep me in line and be like, hey, Pellizzon, knock it off. I also would hope that like I've empowered my community enough and the community around me for them to say the same thing. Um, and like, I don't know, I guess I'm always trying to learn. I'm always trying to learn from other people. And I think that often when you put yourself as a guru or someone who's all knowing, you don't have spaciousness to learn. And that sounds so fucking boring. To me, that sounds so boring. Like I love learning. I want to keep expanding. I don't want to cut myself off from like everything that I don't know. And all the joy to learn it just by saying, well, I'm an expert. Like I can be an expert and still constantly be learning. But I think it also that idea holds so many people back. When we reframe, instead of being an expert to being a contributor, like I contribute to your understanding of intuitive business, doesn't necessarily mean I don't have to be an expert in order to do that. It opens up a permission for us to just start sharing maybe before we thought we might be ready. And just because you're at the beginning of your journey or you're maybe in the middle of your journey doesn't mean you don't have things to share. You do. Like, I wish that more people understood that, who are afraid to get started. Like, we don't all need university level experts or experts with decades of experience to learn from. In fact, we often learn from the people who are closest to us in terms of experience and age. And your peers they want to learn from you too,
I have firsthand experience of that. I had this lovely soul yesterday tell me, hey, on your website, you might want to include your pronouns, kind of like what you were saying, just so that it's clear your pronouns, and also maybe add a sentence somewhere that you're inclusive of all different types of bodies. And I wasn't like, what the fuck did you mean? Like I wasn't like offended or defensive. I was like, wow, somebody took the time to actually care enough to tell me. And it's just going to make me a better person and a better company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you get to make the choice as to whether you feel like that's right for you or not. Because you also have personal sovereignty to be like, maybe you're like, no, I think it's okay. I don't think I need to say that, or maybe you do. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. So, first of all, I love your company. I love your Instagram. It just gives me joy. I love your IGTVs, by the way, because I feel like my bestie Michelle is talking to me. You're just so natural.
Oh, stop it. Thanks.
And
I
you were
always
like,
get so nervous because it's no, I mean, hi, you've done it. Talking on IGTV is so awkward sometimes. You're like, is there anybody out there listening? It's so weird.
but you had one. After watching that, I was like, I have to reach out to her. You were like, I'm gonna tell you about all the things that bothered me this week. And I was like, ooh, tell me, spill the tea, Bessie. Tell me. Well, I just appreciate how outspoken you are and how you're funny. You're hilarious.
Thanks. Yeah, I have like the best partner in the world. He's like so kind, he's so gentle. He like nothing bothers him. He's a Virgo. Like he's like the balancing Virgo. And I'm like, you know what fucking pissed me off today? He's like, tell me, babe, what's going on? What bothered you?
I think I'm gonna need one of those earthly
Yeah, I recommend it. I recommend it.
um anyway, what I was trying to get at is your company definitely feels like there's witchy vibes. I think you call yourself the head witch. You have a coven of other witches. And we were talking about being witches right before we recorded. So how did you find out that you were a witch? Like, what does that journey entail?
Oh my gosh. I think that I didn't want to like claim that word because I didn't feel witchy enough until I looked at like everything I've always done since I was a little kid. Like I've always been obsessed with astrology. I remember begging my mom to buy me astrology books like at Borders, when I was, and her being like, okay, weird. And being cool with it because I was reading. And I remember going to see a tarot card reader when I was like 10 or 11. There was somebody I was in a hotel with my dad. My dad was on a business trip in San Francisco, and there was a tarot card reader in the lobby of the hotel. And I like begged him to let me go see this person. I've always just been into that stuff. I used to make little amulets and like little charms and put magic in them when I was a little kid. And I would I would go into our garden and I would talk to the plants and I would talk to the fairies in the garden. And then as I like started to research more witchcraft, I was like, oh, well, my grandma used to do that thing. Or like, oh yeah, I know salt is like cleansing because that's what I would always do after like a bad breakup. Or like I would always put my feet in salt when I was like going through something emotionally. That was like what I would do. And I think I just started to see myself in so many of my practices that were just innate to me when I was studying more witchcraft. And not I don't really relate to like Wicca witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
It was more like Italian, some Celtic, some stuff from like Ireland, like that where my mom's from. So just like seeing that, I was like, oh, I guess I'm a witch. And also reading Sylvia Federici and seeing that witch really is a stand-in term for a woman who is individual and who has personal sovereignty and makes choices. And I was like, well, I'm definitely a fucking witch if that's what a witch is. Like, and who's like fighting patriarchy and fighting capitalism. Because that's effectively when that term really came into meaning when witch hunts began was during, we were talking about this, but it was during the primitive accumulation, which is the end of feudalism and the beginning of capitalism as we know and understand it today. And women were the ones who were marginalized and oppressed during that time. And then all the other isms sort of started to steamroll out of that when capitalism got more popular. But after putting all those clues together, I was like, oh, I'm totally a witch. Okay, cool. Great. And like, that makes sense. And I don't think anyone would say that I'm not a witch. And even my friends before I started claiming it were like, you're a witch, how did you know that? I had a boyfriend who used to call me a witch because I could read his mind. I'd know when he was about to do things, or I'd text him like right before something had happened or right after something had happened. He'd be like, I guess it's just always been a part of me. And we were talking about reclaiming the word, and I'm so happy to see more people claiming it. And
Oh yeah.
I hope that people don't gatekeep it. Like you can be a witch. Like anyone can be a witch. It's all good.
Yeah, and what you just said makes so much sense, because when I was researching about, the Celtic witches and the Italian ones, and even all throughout Eastern Europe, because all of those European countries were colonized, all of their spirituality was wiped away.
Yep.
And so henceforth, now I'm using that old English. That's why we have so many white people in America who don't have a spiritual practice. And I think that's where appropriation comes in, because they find something that feels good that's not their own, and something gets distorted there. And instead of maybe looking into the ancestral roots of where their own witchcraft or spiritual practices came from. So it's all colonization and capitalism.
It is. It's so crazy to me. One of the first things that we teach inside of the North Node in our members community about intuitive business is like looking at your spiritual ancestry, and not just like doing past life regression and looking at what your past lives might have been, although that's really powerful and we do that too, but genetically, because we know epigenetics are real. We know that we pass down information, both good and bad, from and to our offspring and from our ancestors. And that's the first thing we recommend is like, go look at your ancestry. And a lot of white people don't know where their ancestors came from either. A lot of white people are like, I'm white. And then if you ask them like, well, but what like where, like what place did you come from? They have no idea. And even I'm so lucky, I'm Italian. I know the city that my grandfather and that all the Pellizzons grew up in outside of Venice. It's a tiny little town. I can research like the spiritual practices of that place. And that is such a gift. And I'm so privileged to know that. But on my mom's side, that's all been lost. They kind of know where they're from, but not really. And I think you're so spot on in saying that a lot of white people, because that's been wiped away, they recognize what's true in a lot of cultures that are not theirs, because we feel truth, and we mistake truth with, well, this must be for me. And that it can be for you. It just isn't your practice. You can witness it and you might be able to be invited in. And if you ask for permission, but that doesn't mean you can just take it.
Yeah. And that's so sad to me, because if you don't have that identity, or like a root of like grounded, it's literally your root chakra, like where you're grounded and where you're from. And that to me is like the saddest part, because then you're so detached from how your ancestors practiced. And there's some compassion in there for those people, from me anyway.
Yeah, I feel compassion. I also sometimes want to shake people, and I want to be like, you can't do cacao ceremony. Like, you're white, like you can't do that. You have to ask permission. Like, what are you? I love that you feel like, I love that you feel it. It's real. It is real what you're feeling. And like, we have to honor the traditions. Like, if we truly love these practices, then we have to honor the wisdom holders of those practices.
Yes.
And we have to ask for permission. And that is really respecting those cultures and those traditions. And there's nothing wrong with, like, you shouldn't be afraid to ask for permission unless you're doing something wrong, in which case then you're probably not going to get permission to practice.
That's also decolonizing our minds. And what you said is, something feels true, so you take it on as your own. That's exactly what the colonizers did. They're like, let's come to this country and make them believe in, Christianity. And hey, we're doing a good thing, but you don't know like the real impact of that.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, like, And my mind is going like a million miles a minute. I'm like thinking about appropriation. I'm thinking about like food. I'm thinking about like all these things, right? Like, yeah. And I think the like root of it, where we often get lost in the weeds, because I've heard the argument of like, well, what about when people eat pizza? Isn't that cultural appropriation? I'm like, no, because like Italian people aren't marginalized. Like they are in some ways, but like they don't experience oppression at the intersection that so many people, indigenous people and their practices do. And that's why appropriation, we need to pay attention to it. And we can't just say, well, we're borrowing from everyone. We need to like honor where those practices come from because of the extreme oppression that those people have experienced.
Aho. I agree with you, sister. So I wanted to talk about your intuitive business course, profitable content.
Yeah, we just closed the doors on PCCL, which is crazy. We open them once a year, and we in everything that we do when we teach about intuitive business, me and my team, we're marrying strategy and what I learned in startups and what I've learned running Holisticism, and opening brick and mortar spaces in places like New York and LA. And we also marry the mystical things like, well, how do I use astrology to launch this product? And how can I use my Akashic records to understand more about the intention behind it and what it's supposed to be here to do? And how can I use the tarot to, cast who my ideal client is and understand them, and then bring those two things together. So we just opened the doors to PCCL and closed them, and class starts on May 3rd, which will be really fun.
Okay, so it's closed. If anybody wants to learn how to have an intuitive business or be a part of your circles or anything that you offer, how can they learn more about that?
Yeah, they can definitely listen to our podcast, the 12th House podcast, where we talk all about intuitive business and other things. I complain about what I don't like a lot.
That's a very Pisces thing.
Yeah. Like, you know what I don't like about wellness? Here, this is but I generally try to give a solution because I don't like to just complain. I like to say, this is what I don't like. Here's how I think we could do it better. Let's try to do it better together. Or else you just sound like an asshole. I'm open to just sounding like an asshole too, but I'd like to be a helpful asshole, I think. And we also have our community called the North Node, and we open the doors twice a year to that. So the next time we open will be on the summer solstice on June 20th. And that's our community where we meet every month, and it's all intuitive entrepreneurs, and we deliver new content to them, and it's a really sweet group. It's really cool. So if you want to stay up to date, follow Holisticism on Instagram, and subscribe to our podcast, and you'll be the first to know about updates.
Cool. Is there anything I didn't ask that you would like to share?
I'm thinking. No, I just loved everything that we talked about. I'm curious, what's your human design?
I'm a generator, but I have to like look into deeper, the different pathways and all that stuff.
Yeah. That's cool. I can see your generator action. You feel very like active, and I like that.
Oh yeah. Well, I have my North Node in Cancer in the 8th house.
Whoa.
And I told you I'm an Aries sun. I have a stellium in Libra. And so I have very active energy in my chart.
Whoa. I feel like my chart sometimes is like deceiving because I'm a triple water, and then I have like Venus Pisces. I have so much other like watery water. And then I have a North Node in Pisces. So, but I have an Aries midheaven, and I kind of think that that's actually like one of the strongest placements in my chart, because people are surprised often when I tell them I'm a Pisces.
I'm not surprised.
Really?
Because my mom's a Pisces sun, and she's one of the most like fierce people I've ever met. I think people often think that just because you're a Pisces, you're like soft and ooh, you're flighty, but I find that to be the opposite, actually.
Yeah, I like to embody the Rihanna Pisces
Yeah.
person.
Yes, exactly. Rihanna is like my archetype for everything.
Truly, she can do no wrong. She's like a phoenix rising from from the ashes. Like she's always reinventing herself. She's like YOLOing left and right. She's the best.
Exactly. Well, I want to have you back on to talk more in depth about intuitive business.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for your time. This was so much fun, and yay to witches.
Yay to witches. Thank you for having me. It was so fun to chat with you.